Hello, everyone. My name is Winston Atkins, and I'll be the moderator for this portion of the forum. I'm the Preservation Officer for the Duke University Libraries and one of eight members of CRL's Certification Advisory Panel. Our panel, chaired by Martha Brogan of the University of Pennsylvania, represents the membership's interests in CRL's initiative to review the trustworthiness of digital repositories. So far, we've looked at Portico, HathiTrust, the National Library of New Zealand, and Chronopolis. It's been an interesting initiative for me. CRL has a long experience with preservation and library content, including primary source materials, and they're applying it to digital content organizations. For those of you who are less familiar with CRL's work with digital preservation, I'd encourage you to look under the Archives and Preservation tab on their website. You'll see that CRL has been building resources and tools to give us information about the digital preservation efforts of publishers, digital repositories, and the other services we count on to supply and preserve information. We all invest heavily in these resources, and we're faced with deciding how best to store them and ensure their usefulness and usability over the long run. We can choose to host our content locally, collaboratively, or turn it over to a centralized service, and we can have it managed through a central service or as part of a cooperatively run organization. As we face these decisions, we often wish we could look under the hood to understand the services better. CRL's initiative to certify digital repositories gives us a library-oriented profile of repositories' strengths and weaknesses and allows us to assess that profile against our needs. For this session, we have asked Eileen Fenton and Amy Kirchhoff from Portico and John Wilkin of HathiTrust to discuss their organization's preservation efforts. Each will give us a short overview of their repository and its services, and we'll follow each presentation with a Q&A period. By the way, you can submit questions to the presenters at any time during the presentation. To submit your question, please use the chat function in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. So let's begin our discussion. Eileen Fenton and Amy Kirchhoff will discuss Portico for us. Eileen is Ithaca's Executive Vice President for Content and Technology Services and Portico's Managing Director. She's led Portico since its founding in 2002. And previously, Eileen was Director of Production for JSTOR, another service of Ithaca, and oversaw the addition of more than 13 million pages to their archival collections. Amy Kirchhoff has been Archive Service Product Manager for Portico since 2006. She's responsible for creation and execution of archival policy, and she oversees operation and development of the Portico website. Prior to her work at Portico, Amy was Director of Technology for JSTOR and served as a member of the Shared Software Development Group at Ithaca. Portico itself began as a digital repository for e-journals, but they've since branched into preservation of e-books and digitized historical collections, or D-collections. Today we'll be talking with Eileen and Amy specifically about their D-collections. These are primary source collections and contain content from Adam Matthews Digital and from Gale. Should a triggering event occur, Portico will only make these materials available to Portico member libraries that had a subscription to the collection with the publisher. Eileen?
Thanks, Winston. I appreciate the chance to be here today. So thanks to Bernie for inviting me. And Amy and I are glad to be able to share with the CRL members a bit about Portico's work preserving primary source materials, or D collections as we call them. What I'll do is offer some brief overview of Portico, just to give folks who might not be familiar just a brief sense of Portico's work. But we'll spend the most of my time talking about D-collections and how we've approached that. I'll be offering those comments, but during Q&A, depending on the question, I'll answer or I'll ask Amy to speak up. Amy was especially involved in the CRL audit of Portico, so any questions, especially in that area, Amy's a great resource. With that, I'll just jump in to note that Portico is, at the moment, the largest community-supported archive in the world. And when I say in the world, I'm like CRL. Portico is very much an international organization with libraries and publishers participating from around the world. We work with libraries and publishers and funders to make sure that a range of digital content is well preserved and available into the future when it needs to be. If we flip to the next slide, we'll get just a quick snapshot of what that participation looks like. On the publishing side, for more than 2,000 societies, we have agreements with 120-plus publishers that have committed the list of content that you see there. What this means is there's a little over 12,000 e-journals that have been committed to be preserved in the Portico archive, a little bit over 70,000 e-books, and a much smaller number, although you'll see in a moment large in size, 39 collections from the two publishers that Winston named have also been committed to the Portico archive. If you look at the next slide, I think it's interesting just to see how those title counts compare to quantity of files. Total in the archive, there's in the range of 300 million files being preserved in the archive. And I think it's just interesting to see how journals, books, and collections are represented in the number of files that are preserved in the archive. Obviously, lots of those files are related to e-journals, but lots of files are also related to primary source materials or collections. Just to give you a sense of how that content came into the archive over time, if we look to the next slide, there's just a couple of highlights here in Portico's development. Started as a pilot project, actually, within JSTOR, and then began ingesting content into the Portico archive in 2006, which I'll note is also when we did a test audit with CRL under the auspices of a Mellon grant as CRL was working to develop audit methodologies. We began to offer some access to some of the preserved content in the Portico archive as early as 2007, which I'll confess was much earlier than we had anticipated. Pulled ebooks into the archive in 2009, specifically because we were hearing from publishers and libraries that was sort of the next range of content that was of concern. Also in 2009, responded to the first need to provide some post-cancellation access to a library that had canceled the title but needed ongoing access, and we provided that at that publisher's request to the library. Also in 2009, we started a formal audit with CRL, which in 2010, I'm happy to say, yielded a certification, which was the same year that we began ingesting digitized collections into the archive. If you see in the next slide, as Portico began, it really was a sort of unified preservation service. So if a library was participating in Portico, they were helping to support preservation of e-journals, preservation of e-books. But then as more materials began to be preserved in the Portico archive, as we've tried to illustrate on the next slide, it became clear to us that we needed to be able to offer more choice to libraries. For some libraries, e-journal preservation may in fact be the limit of their preservation need at this time. And so we've restructured participation in the Portico archive beginning this year so that if a library wants to participate only in e-journal preservation, they can do so, or they can participate only in e-book preservation, or both. And collections have also recently come into the archive. Starting with the next slide, I'd like to walk through how it is that Portico has approached the preservation of collections. And starting with probably what is the most pressing area of interest is how is the cause, the preservation of that kind of material covered? Because it's covered a little bit differently than some other genres that are being preserved in Portico. The publishers cover the full cost of preserving their primary source, their digitized primary source materials in the Portico archive. So the publishers pay a fee that helps us provide that services. Libraries do not pay a fee to participate in that part of Portico's preservation service. If you look on the next slide, you can see that the materials, the decollection materials that are being held in Portico become available under very specific conditions and to very specific institutions. They become available when a publisher might cease to offer that material or offer part of that material, or those materials are no longer available from any other source. Available only to those libraries that were initial purchasers or subscribers to those digitized collections. The digitized collections seem to be a bit more niche. Some libraries, they're very, very important to them. Others, maybe not so much, whereas journals tend to be more broadly taken up. And we've tried to acknowledge that with this different approach here. The notion of post-cancellation access is also available in that a publisher can name Portico as a provider of post-cancellation access for decollections as well. And I think it's always important to remind ourselves of why preservation of this material matters. Like, as we're doing the preservation work, what is the goal there? And the next slide, we've tried to just illustrate what that goal is. I think it's important to keep in mind that when we talk about preservation, we're really talking about an ongoing, proactive activity that is all about having the management, the policies, the activities necessary that pursue the four goals that are called out on the slide that you see. Digital preservation is really all about ensuring that the materials that libraries have purchased or licensed, often at great expense, remain usable, the intellectual content is there, that remain authentic. You know that the material is as it was originally published. The provenance is known. The material can be discovered. It's not just lost on some server somewhere, but you can actually find and locate that material. And finally, it can be made accessible at the right moment in time and under the right conditions. Those are really the goals of preservation. And on the following slide, we've just tried to call out some of the activities that ongoing preservation management requires. Replicating the archive so there are multiple copies, having audits like the audit done by CRL, repairing or replacing content if it gets corrupted or equipment if it fails, and then ongoing activities around validating files or updating files if a new version is produced, making sure we keep both the old version and the new version, and making sure that there are active preservation plans in place to be sure that we're staying current with best practices. On the following slide, I thought it might be helpful to also provide some information about specific content that has been committed to the Portico archive. These are the listing of specific primary source collections offered by Gale and Adam Matthew that have been committed to be preserved in the Portico archive. Our work to bring that content into the archive is underway and ongoing. And on the following slide, you can see the listing of collections that are already in the Portico archive, and just helpful to see the number of books or issues that represents for each of those products. That's just a quick overview of Portico's work preserving decollections. I'm happy to answer questions. Amy and I are happy to answer questions as you might have them.
Thank you, Eileen. Now we'll open the discussion to questions from the floor. Remember, please submit your questions via the chat feature on your screen. Who is on your wish list of publishers who haven't yet agreed to deposit content into Portico?
Well, our wish list is really driven by what we hear from libraries is on their wish list. So whether it's a journal or a book or a decollection, our goal really is to make sure that we're focusing the resources we have on preserving the content that is most important from the library perspective. Some publishers that have been mentioned by libraries, I suppose the publisher that has probably popped up in the decollection space most frequently in our conversations with libraries is ProQuest. and we've had some conversations with them, but those are ongoing. Sometimes it's not so much a publisher that a library might mention, but some additional content from Cengage or Adam Matthew. So it comes to us in a couple of different formats.
Okay. Well, thanks. Another question is, when Portico was just journal content, I understood that all articles were reformatted, as we used to say, to a singular schema. Are ebooks and D-collections similarly normalized or otherwise converted?
That's a great question, actually, because what we have determined as we've had an opportunity to look at journals, look at books, and look at D-collections is migration, as we've called it, or normalizing to an archival format isn't always required. And in the case of D-collections, that's an example where reformatting at this time is not required. So we're able to bring that material into the archive in the format in which we've received it, and the format comes to us along with a lot of documentation around that format. And so additional reformatting is not needed at this time. Part of our preservation planning around those materials is to think about when will that be needed, what are the sorts of milestones or thresholds that will be hit to signal to us that some additional reformatting might be needed. Amy, is there any additional input on that question that you want to offer?
Sure. The D-collections are very, very different from e-journals because we get so much content in one format. So one of the drivers behind e-journals and the early transformation of the content is sort of the staggering thought that in 10 years you might have to try and do something with e-journal content that you got 10 years previously that you hadn't looked at, which would be really, really quite challenging given the variety of ways publishers publish e-journals. Whereas with D-collections, that is just not so. It's so much content, and it tends to be beautifully clean. It's also not usually very complex. It's just much less necessary. So I think this does highlight how different content types and different publishers have different ways of meeting the same preservation needs. I will say that we do still do a transformation of the packaging. So all content that goes into the Portico archive has is moved from whatever the publisher's original packaging is into the Portico content model. And has the same set of types of preservation metadata attached to it in terms of events and technical metadata that's captured. And that is true no matter what content type is we're discussing.
Okay, well, thank you. What would happen to the D-collections if Portico were to fail?
That's a great question. I think it's healthy for any archive to contemplate its demise and what that might mean. The way that we think about that question is that it's important for an archive to have the right to preserve the content, but also have the right to pass that obligation and right along to some other enterprise. So when we sign an agreement with a publisher, as part of that agreement, and our publisher agreements, by the way, are posted on the Portico website, part of our agreement is to secure from the publisher the right to transfer our preservation rights and obligations to another not-for-profit organization. So in the case of Portico's demise, we wouldn't have to scurry around and get rights to do that. We already have from the content providers the right to pass that obligation along to some other party. Okay,
thank you. When folks registered, they filled out a survey, and here it is. And folks were very interested in the interface and the types of material you were going to be collecting. Can you talk a bit about plans for expanding the D-collections model to include digital collections created by libraries and offered by libraries from their own platforms, not just commercial publishers?
Yes, I'd love to. And in fact, we did a study with about 16 library participants a year or so ago, and did some investigations in this area, in part with some funding from NEH and IMLS, to look at the range of content being digitized by libraries and what would it mean for us to begin to preserve some of that material in the Portico archive. And we found some really interesting findings from that effort. I suppose not surprisingly, one of the findings was that the number of formats, metadata structures, and approaches that libraries have taken to digitizing their materials varies widely. It's a really wonderful and diverse range of formats, metadata structures, resolutions, image resolutions, and so on, which raises some real complexities, frankly, around preservation and has an impact on potential cost for preserving that material. So as we've thought about that, we've tried to think about, are there ways in which we could have, different tiers of preservation, I suppose, that might allow for sort of shorter-term protection versus longer-term protection that might give a library options, and options at different cost levels. We've actually been doing some brainstorming with the Digital Commons about taking in some of the content that they're holding on libraries' behalf, and is that a way to move some materials into the Portico archive? But we've tried to think about that in ways that would give libraries choice about what level of preservation they want to bring to bear. It's not something we've been able to sort of move beyond the study phase to a pilot phase yet, but we're very interested in thinking with libraries about what that need might look like, and thinking with other preservation repositories like HathiTrust about how we can work together to meet some of those needs. There's a lot of content out there, and we want to be careful about duplication of effort.
Okay. Well, thank you. May I ask quickly who owns the content in the Portico repository?
The original content creator owns the content. The preservation-related metadata that Portico has created is owned by Portico, but the content owner, owns the content.
Great, thank you. And the next question is: are there formats you do not accept, say, with the D collections?
No, there are not.
Great. Oh, by the way, that question was from David Lowe.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, David. There's actually, it's a great question. If I maybe can offer a slightly broader answer than just, no, we do not. We don't actually impose any submission requirements on a publisher wanting, or a content provider wanting to preserve content in the Portico archive. We don't say, yes, we'll preserve your stuff, but you got to submit it in the following way, or it has to be in the following formats. Sometimes there's a little bit of a misperception that we have that. I don't know quite where that comes from. Sometimes publishers will ask us, is there a way you prefer to get it, or a format that you prefer, and we're certainly happy to offer preferences, but there aren't requirements. Some of the more exotic formats, we may be limited in the level of preservation we can provide. My favorite example here is sometimes a journal article might have a unique executable file attached to it in a new programming language that the author has invented and written an article about. Our ability to preserve the full functionality of that new programming language might be limited, but there aren't any format restrictions in terms of what can be submitted.
Okay. Well, has Portico made arrangements for using the publisher's interfaces or something similar to give our users search capabilities similar to what the publisher had provided?
It's good, and a good question, because it gets right at that aspect of the goal of digital preservation being about usability. And we don't make an effort to preserve the publisher's current interface form. Our focus really is preserving the underlying content. And part of what drives that approach is that Portico is an archive that holds material against the worry that at some point in the future it may not be available. We don't know when that point might be in the future, nor do we know what the interface requirements, preferences, preferred browsers, etc. might be for the user community at that time. So we make the investment of the participants' resources in preservation of the content with a minimal interface around it for auditing purposes. A library can come and look in the archive at any time to understand what is being preserved there. But our focus isn't so much on all the bells and whistles. You can certainly search the archive and view the content that's there, but we're not necessarily trying to preserve exactly the publisher's temporal interface of the moment.
Okay, thank you. Tony Horava at the University of Ottawa asked, does Portico accept material in different languages and character sets?
We do accept materials in different languages. There are already materials, non-English materials, in the Portico archive, and some materials that are not necessarily in the English alphabet. There's quite a bit of Russian, for instance, in the archive as well.
Well, thank you. And when do you decide to migrate to a new format?
Good question. I'll ask Amy to chime in here as well. But monitoring the currency of a format is part of the ongoing work of Portico. Typically, migration is oriented toward when we might need to make a change in order to successfully render it or move it out of a publisher's proprietary format structure. But I'll ask Amy to speak to this as well.
Yeah, it's a really good question. We were actually literally just talking about this last week when we were sort of sketching out what a preservation research agenda might look like through the end of the year. And the catch is that we monitor the file format community and we monitor the preservation community both really closely. And it's an area where we feel partnerships are really, really important. So, one of our big factors that we're looking for is when there are strong signs that existing hardware is not going to support a format. As Eileen mentioned, we have sort of different preservation policies for different formats. So for at this exact moment in time, the concern we would have for a PDF that was becoming less stable is much higher than the concern we would have for a Word document, mostly just because of sort of massive amounts of quantity having to do with, that's where the priority needs to be at the moment, given the look of the entire archive. So it's an area where we're constantly doing research. We're constantly paying really close attention to conversations that are happening within both the file format community and the preservation community. We do have an Ithaca-wide working group we call our Preservation Management Working Group, which pulls in people from all of the different Ithaca services. So we've got an S&R staff representative, we've got some content management, we've got some content development, publisher relations representation there, where we make sure we do things like address research agenda and look at developing preservation policies for different services. And that is another point of entry we have into many of the community efforts that are happening in this regard.
Great. Let's see. May I ask you one last question as we wind up? How large can the Portico archive become?
How large can the Portico archive become? I would say there are many vectors on which you can answer that. Quantities of content or types of content, or I would say there isn't any obvious limit. I would say the limit is really driven by what the community need is. To the degree that a service like Portico focused on preservation can step in and meet library and scholarly publishers' needs. There's some boundary on that, but what that looks like, I'm not quite sure. I don't think I can see it from where we are today, given the vast quantities of electronic content that is really important to the scholarly record. I'm sure there must be a boundary, but it's hard to see from where we are right now.
Okay. Well, thank you, Eileen and Amy. That was great. And next, John Wilkin will discuss HathiTrust. John Wilkin is the Associate University Librarian for Library Information Technology for the University of Michigan Library, and also the Executive Director of HathiTrust. Prior to becoming the AUL for Library Information Technology, John served as the head of the Digital Library Production Service at the University of Michigan, a position he held from its inception in 1996. HathiTrust was founded in 2008 to serve as a digital repository aimed at housing the published record. Initially, it included 13 universities of the Committee on Institutional Cooperation, the University of California System, and the University of Virginia. Today, HathiTrust includes more than 50 libraries, and currently the content is overwhelmingly from the partners Google, Internet Archive, and Microsoft digitization projects, and consequently may be under copyright or in the public domain. HathiTrust is planning to expand its content, tools, and services for the use of the library community. John?
Thank you, Winston, and thanks all of you for having me here. I want to talk today not about our digital preservation strategy and not about our cost models, nor about governance, but about the collection that is HathiTrust, about what we think of as the value of the collective collection. So if we could go to the next slide, what I'm going to do is start with a brief statement about what HathiTrust is and what we're trying to accomplish. First of all, I should say it's a partnership of libraries, mostly research libraries, but not all research libraries. We have some Oberlin Group libraries coming in, and interest from some cultural heritage institutions outside the library. And it's a group of institutions committed to the curatorial role of the cultural record. We think of ourselves as focused on creating something, and this is an ostentatious goal here, nothing short of a comprehensive repository of published literature. But I want to give you some data as I go through the presentation to show you how we're accomplishing that. We know that we won't ever accomplish that, but we'll get as close as we can. Right now our focus is primarily on digitization, but even now we have materials coming in that are born digital. One of the things we like to emphasize for the partnership is that this is about collections. It's not about Google digitization. We have sources of content from a number of different digitization agents. As Winston mentioned, Internet Archive, Microsoft digitization, but also the digitization taking place at our partner institutions. We've worked to create tools and specifications, make sure that we can spread the responsibility for remediation to a standard package across the partner institution and central organization in efficient ways. But we've also begun to have conversations with publishers, and have a couple in already and more in the works, with backlists of books and front list material coming in as well. We have focused intensively on sustainability from the outset. The focus here is on preservation, but another thing we like to emphasize is not preservation without access. To the extent that we can view things, we do, and everything is searchable in the repository. We try to shed as much light on the content as possible, and where we can make uses of the material, we do. As I started to say, we've taken sustainability seriously from the start and have built first a cost model based on the depositor pays that has a reasonable share coming in both to current curatorial efforts, but also to what we'll need in the future, including replacement. That's given us a kind of insurance policy going into the future. And our new cost model, the one that we launched in 2013, is one that's based on overlap with partner collections, spreading the costs more generally, making it possible for small institutions to come in, and that's been beneficial for us as well. And finally, just a word about this notion of the collective collection and its benefits. We get a lot of benefit from this consolidation. We're driving costs down, the costs for infrastructure, the cost for the work that goes on around preservation, but it's also given us the ability to consolidate for discovery, getting away from federation, for example, and getting a better handle on the collective collection. So I wanted to do that briefly just to give you a sense of what we see ourselves doing before I go into the collection. So the next slide gives you some sense of what we have in the way of content. Right now, today, 8.5 million volumes. So we always, it's hard to keep the slides up to date. 2.2, a little over 2.2 million in the public domain, as well as many volumes that are in copyright that rights holders have granted permission to open access to. But by and large, the majority of the content is closed. It's accessible only for some uses, Section 108 uses in some cases, uses for users with print disabilities, and we're moving into other areas. But this gives you some sense of the breakdown. 4.5, getting close to 5 million book titles, over 200,000 serial titles, and comprised in this roughly 3 billion pages. Let's go to the next slide and take a look at the language distribution. I want to use this to emphasize the way that this reflects the composition of our collections. Less than half the content is in English. This is the top 10 languages, and you see a fairly substantial portion of it is in German and French and some other Western European languages. But if we go to the next slide and you see the next highest 40 languages, it begins to look like a Tower of Babel here, where we can't even read some of the labels. This is the next 40 languages, but right now in the repository we have over 400 languages represented. Any one of these slices here in this slide dwarfs previous digital library efforts. It is a phenomenally large amount of content in many languages. The next slide also helps reinforce this notion that this is reflective of our collections. Very contemporary, also reflects the history of publishing. A lot of contemporary content, more than half of this wheel is from the 20th and 21st century. The next slide is part of a time series that I want to show you, a piece that shows you that the majority of the content comes from the University of Michigan and following that, California. But if we go to the slide after this, I think you could try that one with the slope. We see an increase of content from partner institutions around the world, including Madrid, coming in with that slope on Michigan changing over time, and this also helps to enrich the diversity of the content in the repository. Let's go to a slide that has some information you've seen from Constance Malpas's piece on the cloud library, and I'll give you a short update on this. When she did her work comparing the content in HathiTrust with ARL institutions, she found median overlap in June 2009 of 19%. That is, the median ARL library could find 19% of its content in HathiTrust, and that held true from the largest to the smallest, from Harvard to Howard. And as the collection grew, we saw the same kind of growth over time. So in June 2010, that had grown to 31%. But on the next slide, I can give you a sense of what has been happening over time. 31% in June 2010, a large infusion of content in the latter half of that year that adjusted that slope in the line with slightly less overlap for large institutions and slightly more overlap for small institutions. Thus, the line at the end of the year became more horizontal, a fairly constant 33% across ARL institutions, and a growth of about 1% per 225,000 volumes we had. We've got capacity for adding 30,000 volumes a day, and we expect to hit somewhere around 10 million volumes at the end of the year, a little bit more than that, and probably 12 million volumes next year, and most of that content is in the pipeline. So today, probably 37% overlap with ARL institutions, 45% by the end of the year. But one of the interesting pieces in Constance's analysis was a look at the Oberlin group, which found a much higher overlap, 41% at the end of 2010, and higher rate of overlap per added volume for those collections. Denser collections, slightly more popular material, and I think that by now we're close to 50% for the Oberlin group of libraries. This really is, in many senses, the collective collection. It reflects our collecting activities across many different types of libraries, and that's one reason why we're adding to this, moving to this cost model of overlap to return to libraries some sense of the benefit they get from this corresponding digital collection. So I think that's given you a sense of what this collection looks like, where we're going with it. I want to end with a slide about the role of HathiTrust for print management. From its inception, we saw this work as being instrumental in guiding us in what we can do with management of our print collections. In fact, we said in 2008 that we wanted to use this collective collection to stimulate redoubled efforts to coordinate shared print storage strategies in libraries, reducing our capital and operating costs. We could see that happening. We could see that happening as the collection grew, and libraries that were in the partnership or coming into the partnership changed their strategies. Recap was one example where the three partner libraries there began to move from independent actions with regard to that print storage facility to coordinated action and what they stored there. But we knew there were other and better opportunities as well, and we have now in development a print monograph coordination strategy that will be presented to the partnership at the Constitutional Convention in October this year, where HathiTrust will take an active role in coordinating information about our print storage commitments in relationship to these digital volumes, so that we can bring those two things together and make rational and independent decisions about what we're storing in our print collections. That's what I wanted to cover for you here, to give you some sense of what we have, where we're going, and the relationship to our print storage strategies over time. Thanks.
Well, thank you, John. Now we'll open the discussion to questions from the floor. Once again, please submit your questions via the chat feature on your screen. We have questions already, one of which is, who provides the financial oversight for HathiTrust? Who approves the annual budget and ensures that proper financial controls are in place?
I'm going to probably say over and over again, you can find more detail on this answer on our website. It's a fairly rich amalgamation of information. The HathiTrust Executive Committee, which is comprised of 8 representatives from our institutions, CIOs, and library deans, is responsible for that. They approve the budget, and they're active in making decisions about where we allocate funds.
Great, thanks. And from Dan Gottlieb, there's a question, are any of your member libraries using HathiTrust as their only access platform to their digital collections?
No, we haven't polled the member libraries, but I'm sure that's not the case because, frankly, it's not comprehensive. Though we will aim for comprehensiveness, it is still only a piece of the libraries. Think about the Oberlin Group libraries. 50% is good, but it's not comprehensive. And the other thing that we need to keep in mind is that we don't have a clear path yet to making lawful uses of the in-copyright volumes. We're making those Section 108 uses. We're beginning to make more vigorous uses of the in-copyright materials for users with print disabilities, but we need to get beyond that before our libraries will use it as their access strategy for their collection.
Okay, thanks. Folks registering for this conference also filled out a survey of questions on HathiTrust, and they're very interested to know about the types of content you plan to collect. Do you always expect to stick with published text, or will you be going into other formats? And do you think you'll be developing tools for any of those?
Yes, we have completed most of the work now on a digital image collection pilot with the Minnesota Digital Library, and we're in the midst of an audio file pilot right now. We do intend to move into other areas of content and other strategies. We're building a publication platform now, and we'll start with open access journals probably in about a year, publishing directly into the repository, open access journals. So that's not different from the content we have right now, but it reflects a change moving into future publishing as well as the published record. But I think you'll see more of the audio, video, image collection sorts of activities in the future. Nothing in the hopper right now for big science data, but certainly conversations.
Okay. Let's see. Is HathiTrust planning on becoming a worldwide service?
We are in discussions with a number of institutions outside of the United States. We were glad to have Madrid come in and hope that we'll have other European libraries. We'll be announcing a Canadian library any day now, and have always seen this as something that is not distinctly American. It is about our collective heritage. Constance has done some good analysis of overlap with Australian libraries, for example, and we find the same sorts of high overlap rates there in collections because we have all collected so ambitiously. We would love to see other countries in as well.
Great. Let's see. Aside from searching your interface, how else can I find out what's in HathiTrust collections?
I think I believe at the URL /access, www.hathitrust.org/access, we have a number of strategies laid out there. One of them is called the Hathi Files, and it's updated daily and accumulated monthly, and has a brief record for everything in the repository, including the rights information. There is a bibliographic API that institutions can use to annotate, throw an identifier at it from your catalog, and it will annotate a volume with a URL if that volume is available in the repository. We have a data API for getting content out of the repository, and are working on other strategies as well.
Great. Brenda Ellis asks, how is copyrighted material accessed, or are you preserving it until it can be made available after it falls out of copyright?
The answer is both. I mentioned Section 108, where those in copyright volumes which are documented to be damaged, deteriorating, lost, or stolen and not on the market, and an unused copy at a reasonable price, and there I'm afraid reciting the law from memory. It gets difficult. Second nature. We're making uses of many thousands of volumes under Section 108 at this point, but services for users with print disabilities as well. It will be possible this summer for persons certified to have print disabilities at partner institutions to access millions of volumes based on the overlap with their collection. But it's still the case that by and large we're holding these volumes until they open up. I should also mention again this point I made earlier. Rights holders routinely send us forms filled out granting us permission to open access to materials, and that happens with individual authors the rights of whose works have reverted to them, but also organizations, nonprofits, the Brooklyn Museum, the Brooklyn Institute, ARL, others have done the same thing, and some university presses.
Great. How does someone get access to the closed content for specific purposes, such as the Section 108 uses?
A partner institution would supply us with information about their determination about the Section 108 use, and we would add that information to the holdings database for that institution's holdings. I just glossed over something there. We've been actively building a holdings database for the print holdings for the partner institutions. We've essentially finished the work on single volume monographs, true monographs, and we'll begin work on multi-volume works later this year. That allows us to store information about the corresponding information for the partner institution. So you can imagine we have a digital work, the partner institution holds a print copy, and the partner institution declares that their copy is lost, for example, and that they've determined that there is no unused copy on the market at a reasonable price. At that point, it lights up for an authenticated user from that institution. We know their holdings, we know their rights determination, and we know the user, and we can provide access to it.
Fantastic. Can you tell me what your goals are for the Constitutional Convention?
We put together our governance model in a way that was admittedly stopgap. We wanted to have something that worked but wasn't permanent in 2007, 2008, and promised the early members that we would review our activities 3 years in and chart a course for what happened beyond the first 5 years in light of partner input, and decided at that point to have that process take place through a constitutional convention. The primary areas for discussion are likely to be governance, finances, and probably administration as well. Some other areas are likely too. Partners will get a formal 3-year review that's being conducted by the Strategic Advisory Board in conjunction with Ithaca Consultants this summer in July, and we will use that to begin to solicit from partners ballot proposals in those areas that I've mentioned.
Okay, thank you. How do you envision HathiTrust will look in terms of size and content in 10 years' time?
I think we're going to grow substantially over that period of time. In the pipeline right now, there are 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 million volumes that we could ingest over the next year, but are locked up for various reasons. For example, the CIC's agreement with Google embargoes the in-copyright materials, so they don't get those back. That will enrich the collection significantly. That would bring us to 15 million volumes. I think it's not inconceivable that we would hit 20 million volumes, that we would have concerted efforts around digitization to fill in the gaps. I think we are seeing now a lot of interest from smaller institutions because of the value they see in the overlap model. I hope in that time we will begin to make uses of in-copyright materials along a number of vectors, for example, possibly orphan works, maybe fair use, and that it will be easier for us to make decisions about how we manage our print collections in coordination with this body of materials that we collectively manage.
Well, thank you, John. That's a great insight into what's happening at HathiTrust. And I'd also like to thank Eileen and Amy for their discussion of Portico. And now I'd like to introduce Bernard Riley, CRL's president, who will talk about the CRL's Print Archiving initiatives. It seems like a great transition.
Thanks, Winston. Just a couple things. We are working, CRL is with an ISO working group. This is a working group that's has drafted a standard for the assessment of trusted digital repositories for ISO. The standard is in draft, and it's based heavily on the TRACK checklist, which is the criteria against which we looked at, the Center for Research Libraries and the Certification Advisory Panel looked at Portico and HathiTrust. The standard is out and published, or the draft standard is out and published for comment, and it's being used to conduct a number of test audits in the U.S., the U.K., and in Europe. CRL is organized the U.S. audits that are being done to test the standard. However the testing goes, that standard will be submitted for approval as an ISO standard in due time. I think the fall timetable is what we're looking at. There is currently an ISO standard for the Trusted Digital Repositories, which is the OAIS reference model, which is based on the OAIS reference model. That's a very broad, general standard for the very, very broad, rough architecture of a digital preservation system. The track standard will give it a much more specificity. It's much more detailed in terms of processes that have to happen and controls that have to be in place. We're doing that. But my real topic is print archiving. We are supporting print archiving collection management. We have Liz Ann Payne has been working with us to draw together a number of the regional print archiving efforts. Liz Ann, with a considerable assistance from Robert Keefe of Occidental College, has convened a series of roundtables at ALA that have been conversations among consortia, representatives of concerned organizations and representatives of individual libraries that are doing or are contemplating doing print archiving on a meaningful scale. These consortia tend to be regional efforts, either at the state level or at the regional efforts. These are organizations like the CIC, American Society, Association of Southeast Research Libraries, the University of California, California Digital Library, Paxcal in the Pennsylvania, the Ohio Link group. We are learning from those roundtables and those series of conversations what is really needed by these groups. We went into this knowing that that print archiving is becoming a more urgent issue for libraries because of economic considerations, because of the cost of print plus electronic subscription. So there's work to be done, but we weren't quite sure what CRL's role in that was. We do have shared collections. We've built shared collections since 1949 in particular focused areas, but we are clearly unable to build shared collections for all of the materials that need work. So bringing together these regional efforts has taught us a lot. What we're finding is that what these efforts, the most pressing common need among these efforts is information about holdings. There's just not enough information out there, not enough data to enable libraries to make decisions about what to retain, what to withdraw, what to keep, what to archive. There is some information obviously in the big utilities like OCLC WorldCat, but that information tends not to be either granular or up to date enough to enable people to make informed decisions. So we're doing two things. We're starting we started in January working with the California Digital Library to develop paper registry and decision support. The second thing, we have engaged Ithaca in a study to help us develop the data support for print archiving for the longer term. Print archiving, the paper registry and decision support. This is named after the 2003 Preserving America's Print Resources Conference that CRL held. That conference brought together libraries and consortia to talk about shared collections and the potential for work on the national level. What it told us was that we need more information about holdings, that there's not enough data out there to do national level print archiving in a responsible, informed way. Number two, that where we need to work and where we need to focus these efforts is where there is a concentration of resources and aggregation of expertise and a history of cooperation. That these kinds of efforts work best when there's very, very strong communities of interest that can coalesce around the long-term archiving of print. So what the paper registry is designed to help support certain decisions. The first, the most obvious, is what do we retain? What do we archive? Which specific titles can we withdraw from physical collections? But also, what kind of service is needed? Say we archive, what kinds of services need to be layered on top of that archiving? Is it enough just to do an archive, a dark archive? Most people tell us it really is not. So what are the levels of services that are needed to layer on top of an archive if it's going to be a meaningful, useful, and sustainable archive? Third, do we digitize something we have or otherwise reformat it? Say that we have a body of material that is not available in electronic forms. Do we have enough information to help us decide whether we should digitize it or whether someone else has digitized it or not? And then also, do we conserve or replace that material? If we're a collection of record upon which other libraries are relying for long-term retention of materials, there should be really an obligation to conserve or replace material that is damaged or lost during the course of our archiving work. Additional decisions relating to those. Do we buy or subscribe to a major fee-based database or major commercial database? What we've seen a lot of, and what is particularly of interest to CRL and CRL libraries by implication, is the large databases of digitized newspapers, of digitized books, of digitized journals that are supposed to help us replace or at least provide delivery of electronic versions of physical materials. How good are they? JSTOR clearly is different than some of the other journal collections out there, digital journal collections out there. But do people have enough information to make those decisions based on everything? People know, I think, plenty about JSTOR, but they know very little about what's under the hood with some of the other databases. Can we trust or invest in a major open access database? Even can we build tools on open access databases like the Chronicling America database of newspapers at the Library of Congress, which is open access, or even to the HathiTrust repository? Do we have enough information to help us to decide how much we should invest in building tools onto those tools that might be discovery or text mining or those kinds of things? And then also, just how much can we invest, or how much is it appropriate to invest in digital preservation service, like some of the like clocks or Portico or Meta Archive, HathiTrust. So the purpose of this paper registry is to inform planning and decision-making at research libraries on the preservation and disposition of print serial collections. CRL's long-standing area of focus has been serial collections, news, journals, historic journals, government publications, those kinds of things. The database will be designed to support decision-making at libraries and at regional consortia on preservation and disposition of those kinds of collections. Again, there is a lot of information in OCLC and WorldCat, but it's lacking in the granularity and the immediacy of the information that's needed to make these decisions. So the database, what will it actually do? We are working at this in a couple phases. We are engaged now with California Digital Library in the first phase. This first phase will produce a database at the end of the year that will ingest, manage, and process information about individual library holdings of ISSN and non-ISSN journals. It will record the conditions under which those holdings are archived by the libraries participating in recognized print archiving programs like CRL West, others. Third, it'll record the presence of digital versions of serial materials, serial titles in selected digital repositories, namely certified digital repositories. These will enable people to match collections against what's held in reliable certified digital repositories like Portico. So the paper registry, as I said, is being developed by CRL and by California Digital Library in cooperation with CRL, and we'll have something up and running and exposed the end of the calendar year. The second initiative, which I'll just talk very briefly about because it's something we've just gotten started on, is an Ithaca study. We've engaged Ithaca to do some work based on the what to withdraw, or to build on the what to withdraw tool. This is the purpose of the study is to assess the needs. What kind of information do people doing print collection management and collection development need to make decisions longer term? Ithaca is assessing the needs of potential users of the paper registry system to develop a set of preliminary general specifications for viable feature options for further decision support and analysis modules of the paper system and support system. This creation of this data support is very closely linked with the Global Resources Forum that was discussed in the session 1 this afternoon, which I discussed this morning. The purpose of the Global Resources Forum is to provide information, analysis, and information sharing support for libraries having to make critical decisions about preservation. The preliminary survey will examine a number of things. It'll look at ways in which members of the library community think about their print collections, what the current decision-making processes are like, who's making them, on what level of the library are they being made, and it'll look at the collection management needs, other collection management needs that'll guide further development of the paper registry and decision support. The next step will be to define the high-level system specifications for the next phase of the paper database and decision support. So those are two initiatives that I thought you should know about. We will be reporting on them as progress happens. That pretty much closes the second session of the this afternoon's forum. On the behalf of the staff at CRL and the others, like the members of the Certification Advisory Panel and the others that have contributed to these presentations today, I want to thank you for joining us for today's Collections Forum. The presentation will be available online on our website at www.crl.edu and on YouTube, that trustworthy digital repository of video, next week. You will receive an email next week with the details if you've registered for this forum. The email will also contain a link to a follow-up survey about today's presentations, which we hope you'll take a moment to fill out. Your feedback is very useful to us in continuing to construct these presentations and to serve the CRL membership. We also would like to remind you that CRL will continue today's conversations in webinar throughout the year. Next month, on May 11th, we will hold our Collections and Services webinar, which is an ideal primer for those new to CRL and for those who would like a refresher course on the benefits of CRL membership. On July 13th, James Simon will host our webinar on news preservation and access, which will cover CRL news collections, but also major news databases such as the World Newspaper Archive, African newspapers, and others, and the challenges of preserving online news. Much of the discussion in that will be based on a recent study CRL did for the Library of Congress INDIP program on the sourcing, production, and distribution of electronic news. Other webinars this year will cover Middle Eastern and Islamic resources and print archiving. For more information on these, you can see the events page of our website at, once again, www.crl.edu. Thank you again for joining us, and have a wonderful afternoon or evening.